Isn't this great?
Yeah.
We're lucky to be here, and especially since we've got it almost to ourselves. It's not overcrowded. I'm Sam Waterston, and because of the parts I've played, I've gotten to visit quite a few remote and wild areas, but Glacier National Park, which is where we are, is really something pretty rare, and precisely because it's not overcrowded. Overcrowding is a problem, not just in our national parks, but in wild areas throughout the world. However, something called ecotourism may be able to help. I can tell you that heading out to play a round of golf or tennis or lying on the beach is not ecotourism, but at the same time, you can't say that every hiker walking up and down this trail today is an ecotourist either. Because what we're talking about is an attitude. It's an ethic that calls on travelers to contribute actively to conservation. The question is, can a buzzword really lessen tourism's effects on the environment? And I don't think anyone knows the answer. But there is strong evidence that ecology and tourism can be successfully combined. Ecotourism may be a new word, but it's not a new idea. After all, the tourist business contributed to the creation of America's national parks over 100 years ago. From the very beginning, American tourists helped to foot the bill for the world's first national park system. Starting with Yellowstone in 1872, and for the next half-century, Congress set aside millions of acres, the jewels of our present-day system: Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Crater Lake, and Glacier. 40 parks in all, the world's first national park system. Congress wanted the parks to be pleasure grounds for tourists, but early settlers saw these wild western lands as fair game, and park resources remained up for grabs. When exploitation got out of hand, cavalrymen were called into Yellowstone. They confiscated poachers' loot and evicted miners and squatters. Loggers were prohibited from any further timbering in the area. But the plundering continued, this time with government approval. In 1913, the breathtaking Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite National Park was dammed to provide water for the growing city of San Francisco. Preservationists like John Muir despaired. Outraged, park advocates closed ranks and began to promote tourism as the most dignified exploitation of the parks. Oddly enough, they found an ally in railroad companies which were opening the West to tourism, such as the Northern Pacific, which built hotels in Yellowstone back in 1886. Banking on the profits to be had in America's first park, the Northern Pacific set a trend by calling itself the Yellowstone Park Line. In Yosemite, the Southern Pacific was quick to follow suit, making the park into a trademark destination for the company. The idea caught fire. Soon 17 different rail operators were spending millions of dollars on lavish ad campaigns for national park travel. The results? Americans packed their bags for the great outdoors. This gave steam to the powerful new alliance between railroad barons and park advocates who worked together to make the case that park preservation meant good business. Park leader Stephen Mather made extensive use of railroad support by taking business leaders, journalists, and legislators on coast-to-coast forays to see the national parks. Congress was convinced that keeping the parks intact made good economic sense, and the landmark National Park Service Bill was passed in 1916. The brand new Park Service, with full railroad support, entered an era when tourism was its #1 priority. Perhaps more than any other, Glacier National Park owes its existence to railroad travel. Lewis Hill, owner of the Great Northern Line, played a key role in establishing the park in the remote Montana Rockies. He gained exclusive access to the park by making sure the boundaries hugged the tracks of his railway. Hill constructed an extensive system of lodges, chalets, and camps in the backcountry, many accessible only by boat or horseback. No expense was spared to create a rustic atmosphere with all the amenities of the day. Glacier was transformed into a well-groomed recreational paradise, beyond anything the government could have paid for. Tens of thousands came, who in turn helped to spread support for parks across America. Clients rode on 1,000 miles of horseback trails in panoramic country, trips that have become the stuff of legend. One old-timer, Bill Wanser, was there.
I can remember 900 horses saddled up at Many Glacier, the hotel, at one time. As I recall, it cost $55 for a 5-day trip, which included your guide and 3 meals and a good bed in the evening. People would save a whole year of their salaries to come out for a 2, maybe 3 weeks tour of the park in the horseback days, when the horseback dude was king. School marms from Iowa would come out, and I don't know whether they were hunting for a handsome cowboy type or what, but we had a lot of, in fact, I recall at least 120 guides to go the various trails with these dudes throughout the park.
This happy alliance between tourism and conservation made the U.S. National Park System a great success, and it became a model for countries around the world. But the strain of making wild lands into tourist attractions began to take a toll on the parks. By popular demand, rangers allowed wild animals to frequent visitor areas. In Yellowstone Park, bears were fed garbage in arenas for tourist entertainment. It wasn't long before officials realized that what was good for the tourist business wasn't always good for the parks. Today, behind every pretty vista, there is an uneasy tension between profit and preservation. The old trails are still used by hikers and riders, and the lodges are well-loved historic monuments. The parks seem wild, but the balance between tourism and wild land protection is breaking down. Dogged efforts to protect the parks from too much use are being overwhelmed, and the character of America's most popular wild lands is threatened.
These days, more than 250 million visitors every year come to the national parks in the United States. They come from across the country and around the world, hoping to catch a glimpse of a real piece of wilderness. And other countries, from Borneo to Madagascar, witnessing this growth and interest, are anxious to cash in on the exact same market. But opening the world's last remaining wilderness areas to tourists without preparing for the impacts is a risky business. Even here, the gate fees are not enough to cover the damage done by large numbers of sometimes unprepared tourists. So what ecotourism asks us to understand is that the money we spend on travel and the way it gets used will have a crucial impact on how these delicate habitats are preserved.